Entertaining Strangers. Joe turned on the TV when he heard on the news that a storm was hitting the Northwest, and it would be a good idea for people to stock up on water and food for an emergency reserve. Joe was a retired businessman, and he knew that a supermarket was not very close for driving. He was in his mid-70s and didn't want to get caught in the snow on the way back. He had just finished putting up the artificial tree that he had in the basement. After his wife died, he didn't want to bother with Christmas. But this year, he felt like bringing back some old memories of Christmases long past. After the last of the tinsel was on the tree, he stood back to look at the tree, and it looked pretty good for an old tree. Then he remembered about what they said about the storm approaching. He checked his cabinets for canned food, and then under the cabinet for food supplies. He scratched his head thinking how he would get to the store. Well, he thought to himself, I could call a taxi, and that way I wouldn't have to drive. But by the time I get there, the storm would have hit, so that won't work. He looked out the window and noticed that the storm was picking up, and he could see his lawn covered with a white blanket of snow. He decided to light the fireplace. Then he sat down in his big cozy chair and began to read the newspaper. Chapter 2. Room in the Cabin. An hour had passed, and by this time Joe had fallen fast asleep. He was awakened when he heard someone knocking on his front door. When he opened up the door, he saw a man standing there. He looked quite cold, with his arms folded around him. "Excuse me, sir. My car broke down outside your house, and I'm afraid my wife and child will get extremely cold waiting in the car. Could they possibly come in while I call someone to come and help us? We live about a mile up the road, and it's too risky to start walking, and the wind is really strong." Joe, looking at the poor man, told him, Of course you can come in. "And please tell them to come in," he said. By this time it was really snowing, and the wind was beginning to howl. Joe went to the kitchen to put on some water in case they would like something hot to drink, and then he threw another log in the fire. When they entered the house, they stood at the entrance. Please come in," Joe said, "and make yourselves at home," pointing to the living room. "Thank you so much," the mother said. Joe offered the dad to use the phone. "Would you like some hot cocoa or tea?" he asked as he looked at the little girl. Thank you, but we don't want to inconvenience you," the mother replied. "Well, it looks like they'll be here by tomorrow morning," the dad said. "Oh, John, what are we going to do?" the mother said, frightened, looking at her husband. "We can't walk home in this blizzard. It's too far," she said, worried. Just then Joe interrupted. "Well, you can stay here if you like. I have an extra bedroom upstairs, and it's big enough for all of you to sleep so comfortably in." "Well, my wife and children used to live here, and, the family, they're all gone now, so there's just me." "Oh, we just can't thank you enough," the mother said. "By the way, my name is John, and this is my wife Mary, and our daughter Elizabeth." "Well, you can just call me Joe," as they shook hands. "I really don't have much food in the house," Joe said, but I'm sure we'll manage for the night." "Well," the father said, "it just so happens that before this happened, we had just gone shopping for our weekly food supply. We have plenty to eat for all of us." "I'll go get the groceries," John said. "I will help you, dear," the mother said excitedly. "Well, look at that," Joe said, looking at the little girl. "God be praised. He not only supplied the food, but good people to share it with as well," as he laughed. "Ha! I can't believe this. My wife would be so pleased. I couldn't get to the supermarket because of the storm, and for an old man like me, I didn't want to drive in the storm. So I just told the good Lord I would just sit and trust Him to work it all out. And look, here you are." The little girl just smiled. "Now, how about that cocoa, huh?" Joe said. Just then the door opened, and there stood John and Mary with both arms full of groceries. "Hey, Joe," John said, "I'm the chef tonight. So, what would you like for dinner?" Ha! Laughing, they all went into the kitchen to cook their meal. "It pays to be kind," Joe said as he looked up at the ceiling. The end.